ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितमेन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो नमो अनिरुद्धाय ऋषिकेशेन्द्रियात्मने नमः परमहंसाय पूर्णाय निवृत्तात्मने स्वर्गापवर्गद्वाराय नित्यं शुचिसदे नमः। नमः हिरण्यवीर्याय चातुर्होत्राय तान्तवे। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So today again we are gathered to discuss the dialogue between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Sri Haridas Thakur, his dearmost devotee. And in the past few weeks, we went through the different chapters of the Harinam Cintamani, very specifically focused on being able to eliminate the block of the wall that rises between us and the holy names. The scriptural conclusion is that there are only two very special spiritual objects in the world. One of them is the jiva, and the other is the holy name. And what blocks us in between while we chant the holy name are the aparadas, or the nama aparadas, the offenses that we commit. So over the last several weeks, we went through in detail each and every offense as delineated and as described by Srila Haridas Thakur. We went through those offenses in understanding what causes them. We also examined different ways for us to provide and remedy the offenses so that we could move forward. And in this week, we are going to focus on the last offense. Of the 10 offenses, we have come to the last offense, and hopefully, after this, we would discuss further. There are a few other topics in Sri Harinam Cintamani, which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has provided. We will discuss those as well, but today we'll be focusing on the last offense. So before we begin, I just want to read the 10 offenses again. The first that we read was to criticize saintly persons, to commit Vaishnava aparad, to consider the demigods to be independent of the Supreme Lord, or that Lord Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes are separate from the Lord. To consider the demigods to be independent, or that Lord Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes are separate from the Lord. This offense arises from the fact that we have assumed the philosophical conclusion of the Mayavadis, where everything is being viewed on the same platform, and Krishna's transcendental pastimes are also equated with material activity, and as a consequence, we put Krishna, the demigods, his activities, everything on the same platform, which is a great offense. To disobey the spiritual master who reveals the truth about the holy name. This is Guru Aparad, which is also a direct result of Vaishnava Aparad. To criticize the scriptures that describe the glories of the holy name. To consider the excellences and divine qualities of the holy name as delineated in the scriptures to be imaginary. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy names. That is 6. Number 7, to instruct faithless persons on the glories of the holy name. Number 8, to equate chanting of the holy name with the materially auspicious activities recommended in the Karmakanda section of the Vedas. And number 9, to be inattentive while chanting the holy name. Number 10, to not develop love for the holy name after knowing his glories because of maintaining attachments to the body and things related to the body. So this is today's discussion topic, maintaining attachments to the body and to things related to the body, even after hearing many, many instructions. And according to the scriptural conclusion, according to the conclusion of Srila Haridas Thakur, this is termed to be the worst offense. And it is termed to be the worst offense because it is very subtle and it's very, very difficult to just give up this offense over a period of time. Even those who chant for 20 years, 25 years, who have been chanting and engaging in the process of chanting, may have even given up all other offenses, but they would struggle with this particular offense because attachments in this world are not easily delineated. It is very difficult to see attachments. It's very, very difficult to see certain subtle attachments that are holding us back. We may be able to see gross attachments. We may be able to perhaps perceive and work and remove a few other aspects, but it is very difficult to perceive attachments because they're quite subtle. In some cases, they're very subtle. It's very difficult for us to reach conclusions on how to remove these attachments because we don't even see them. Okay? So now in this particular chapter, Srila Haridas Thakur starts out by first talking about the 6 limbs of surrender. Okay? He talks about the 6 limbs of surrender. He says, every devotee must cease all namaprads and surrender completely to the holy names. According to the scriptures, the process of surrender has 6 limbs. It's beyond my ability to describe them in detail. This is the humility of Srila Haridas Thakur, where he says it's beyond his ability to describe them in detail. Yet I shall touch upon these 6 and place them before your lotus feet. It's very interesting. I'm just going to read the 6 limbs of surrender. The 6 limbs of surrender are given in great detail in the Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita, which has been authored by Srila Rupa Goswami, which we call Nectar of Instruction, as authored and translated by Srila Prabhupada. The vow to accept everything favorable for the execution of devotional service. Likewise, to reject anything unfavorable. To be convinced that Lord Krishna will always give protection. To depend wholly on Krishna for everything. To always feel meek and humble. And to throw oneself at Lord Krishna's lotus feet. These are the 6 limbs of surrender. What is very, very difficult? What is very difficult about the 6 limbs of surrender is that they have to be actively participated upon on a daily basis. One has to be able to take inventory of each and every activity in relationship to the 6 limbs of surrender. Now let's talk about the first one. The vow to accept everything favorable for the execution of devotional service. The vow to accept everything favorable for the execution of devotional service. Now, how do we determine what is favorable and what is not favorable? This particular situation comes from the specific verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which is 18.65, where Krishna says, Manmana bhava madbhakto, madhyajimam namaskuru, mame vashyasi satyam te, pratijane priyosime. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are a very dear friend. Now this Manmana bhava madbhakto, always think of me. Always think of me, become my devotee, become my friend. All of these are a part of our constantly being able to evaluate activities on this plane by keeping Krishna in the center. How do we constantly keep Krishna in the center? And to the extent to which we keep Krishna in the center, to such extent we would be able to manage this particular limb of surrender, which says, always keep Krishna and do things which are favorable to Krishna. The more and more we meditate on what is favorable to sadhana, the more and more we meditate on what is favorable to sadhana and how we can center our life, or rather center our existence around being able to execute the limbs of devotional service, to that extent we would be able to make a statement that we are executing our life based on whatever is favorable to Krishna. To that extent. Because to the extent to which we are able to center Krishna around our lives, rather center our lives around keeping Krishna in the center, that to that extent one will have the ability to make a statement that he or she is leading a life which is favorable. That's the first point. What is unfavorable is also a derivative of that particular attitude of constantly examining what is favorable and what is going to move us forward, and being able to take decisions in life by keeping Krishna in the center. The more we are able to do that, the more we will be able to execute this particular limb of surrender. Of the 6 limbs, the 2 limbs are what is favorable, what is not favorable. Okay? And that cannot be understood unless one has Manmana bhava madbhakto. To the extent to which we meditate, to the extent to which we get involved in our identity of being or wanting to be a servant of Krishna, based on the Sambandha Gyan, the extent to which we have received Sambandha through the process of Guru Nishta, to the process of chanting, we would be able to keep Krishna in the center, and everything and anything would be focused on what is favorable and what is not favorable in being able to progress further in wanting to know him and wanting to serve him. Okay? It is all going to depend on Sambandha again. How far have we gone in understanding our relationship with Krishna? Because it is very easy for us to execute duties in terms of being a father, being a husband, or being a wife, and so on and so forth. Why is it somewhat easy? I'm not saying it is super easy. I'm just saying it is easy because the identity is established. Since the identity is established, one is able to examine what the duties are in such an identity, and they're able to execute those duties. Okay? Whatever duties are there, it becomes clear because the identity is clear and we're able to move forward. Now, in Krishna consciousness, we start out with aspiring to be completely surrendered servants of Krishna. And as we aspire and we want to move forward with being completely surrendered servants of Krishna, the more and more our knowledge increases on how we are related to Krishna. To that extent, we are able to keep Krishna in the center. Just as much as it is very natural for parents to focus on their children because they are attached. And as a consequence of this attachment, so much of the activity is just done quite naturally. There is no artificial engagement when a child is concerned for a loving parent. In a similar fashion, when the sambandha between Krishna and us becomes quite evident, then this becomes very easy. Now comes the question of how do you increase that sambandha? And that sambandha increases when we actively desire to do so. When we actively desire of wanting to know Krishna and make plans and actively engage in being able to do everything based on his will. In other words, we constantly examine our actions, our decisions, and see whether this would affect our Krishna consciousness. Is it going to be favorable for our sadhana? Is this activity going to enhance my ability to chant? Is this activity going to enhance my ability to associate? Is this activity going to enhance my ability to read Srimad Bhagavatam or other scriptures? Is this activity going to enhance my ability to probably, engage in greater level of surrender and service and so on? When we start examining our activities in relationship of wanting to know Krishna more, or wanting to go deeper into Krishna consciousness, then we are in the process of wanting to engage more and more and know him better. So it's just a matter of time when he would make arrangements for us to know him fully. And that is a process of sadhana bhakti, where we constantly endeavor to place ourselves in a position of being able to act in his favor. And then he, on his end, he reciprocates by offering us all kinds of support and brings us closer and closer. Okay? Now, let's look at the other limb of surrender. We saw two of them. To accept things that are favorable, to reject things which are unfavorable. To be convinced that Lord Krishna will always give protection. And then the next one, to depend wholly on Krishna for everything. This is a very tough one to do. To be convinced that Lord Krishna will always give protection, to depend wholly on Krishna for everything. Now, different ashrams have different variations of this particular limb of surrender. To depend wholly on Krishna, to always depend on Krishna for protection. In the Grahastha ashram, it's somewhat difficult to experience this particular mood, because this is the mood or the original mood of a surrendered soul. In other words, when we started out Harinam Cintamani, we defined who is a Vaishnava. And the definition of a Vaishnava, the Swarup Lakshana of a Vaishnava, is someone who has taken complete shelter of Krishna. So someone who has taken complete shelter of Krishna is the actual definition. Now this has to do with someone who has taken shelter of Krishna, who is completely dependent on Krishna, who is also completely confident of the protection offered by Krishna. In the Grahastha ashram, the reason I'm making that statement is that in the Grahastha ashram, there's a lot of planning which goes on in terms of being able to ensure that we have enough Lakshmi in case there are times which are difficult. There's a lot of planning that goes on in terms of wanting to attain different objectives and so on and so forth. As a consequence, it is very rare for someone to be able to experience this whole position of being able to completely depend on Krishna. Even though someone might have monetary resources, there are circumstances which can happen where someone could go into a health crisis, and the health crisis could put them in a mood of There's really nothing which the world can offer other than you. So sometimes these are great blessings, because these blessings are being given, and these blessings are being given with a special purpose, where someone who is engaging in the process of bhakti has received knowledge, and then he or she is stricken with something which is very serious. Okay? It could either be that they are financially so displaced that they have to completely depend literally on Krishna. It's an experience. That experience brings them very close and gives them understanding of the original Swarup of the Jiva, or rather the actual definition of a Vaishnava who is completely dependent in the shelter of Krishna. It gives them an experience. They know, how do we cope with such a circumstance? How do we cope? Do we become frustrated and do we start blaming Guru and Krishna? Or do we accept the arrangements made by Guru and Krishna? Or do we accept life exactly as being presented and say that this is the arrangement of Guru and Krishna, and this is exactly what I need for me to be able to move forward? Do I have gratitude, or do I develop frustration? This is a checkpoint. It is a very important checkpoint for us to see if we are constantly becoming frustrated by the different changes that occur around us in the material world. The material world is designed to frustrate us. Are you playing into that frustration? Are you getting frustrated on a daily basis? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Are we getting frustrated because something is not working out the way it is supposed to be? Are we getting frustrated with the body? Yes, the body can be a problem. It can be, because it's designed to be a problem. It's breaking down constantly, even as we speak. Every moment, every second, there's destruction occurring in the body. It never functions optimally, unless there are very, very few cases where it functions, but even there, it's quite dysfunctional. So are we getting frustrated with life? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. If we are devotees, and if we are chanting the holy names, and if you're engaging in seva, and you're worshipping deities, if we are getting frustrated, it's a warning. It is simply a sign that our own ability to accept arrangements which are being offered by Guru and Krishna is in serious jeopardy. We are not accepting those arrangements, and rather we are exposing ourselves to the material energy fully. It is because we are exposing ourselves to material energy that we experience frustration. If we are exposing ourselves to Krishna and we think that this is Guru and Krishna's arrangement for our benefit and we are trying to grow, then that frustration will turn into gratitude, because there will be realizations. Because there never is a situation where Krishna moves away. He never does. Krishna's mercy is always available and Krishna never moves away. But then if our own endeavor is such that we constantly feel that I'm frustrated, I am going through frustration because something is not working out, this is not working out, that is not working out. This frustration business, which goes on in the minds of devotees, if you are initiated, the more you have moved ahead in the process of devotional service, this particular aspect of frustration should be completely absent. Frustration is the mode of ignorance. Frustration is the attitude that Krishna is not in charge, that Maya is in charge. Frustration is where we are playing into the game that the material universe has to offer. Then there's really no difference between us and someone who does not have the knowledge, who has not received Kripa, who is completely connected, not completely disconnected from the spiritual sky. So there really isn't any difference if we become frustrated. So in the Grahastha ashram, there will be circumstances. Normally, it's a challenge in the Grahastha ashram to experience the Swarup Lakshana of complete dependence, because we are constantly planning for the future. We're constantly saving for the future, which is a function of the Grahastha ashram. Nothing wrong with it. It should be done. But I'm saying it's a function of the Grahastha ashram. As a consequence, one cannot make a claim that they are well situated in the Grahastha ashram and they are experiencing the Swarup Lakshana of complete dependence. Because complacency and spiritual experiences go ill together. There has to be some intensity, and intensity will come in any ashram, but in the Grahastha ashram, because of the planning, it is somewhat less obvious. In the case of the renounced order, they are completely dependent in many cases. For instance, if the typical renunciate, they have to move from one house to the other just to beg. They have to move from one situation to the other. They really do not have a place to stay, so on and so forth. They're completely dependent on nature. They sleep under trees. These are all experiences which a renunciate is supposed to have so that they're able to depend fully. Okay? There might be other complexities, but the point which you're trying to make here is the Grihastha ashram, because of our attitude of wanting to make everything pakka, we may not experience this particular issue of being completely dependent on Krishna fully. But even in the Grihastha ashram, there can be crises. There can be a crisis of health. In a crisis of health, everything about our life can go upside down, and one's priorities can change, and one suddenly has to view everything from the situation of, how long do I have to live, and what is it which I can do, what is it which I cannot do. Now, that situation in many cases is a gift. If you're spiritually conscious, if one is spiritually conscious, and one has association which is advanced, and one has real potency of the bhakti for them to be able to move forward, this particular situation of being put into a situation of terrible confusion and so on and so forth can be a great blessing if it's used properly. It's great fuel. Now, we are not wishing such circumstances on anyone, but those circumstances can be unusual in their ability to clear and sort out many doubts about the potency of the holy names. It can sort out many doubts about dependence, which is Shastric conclusion of how do I depend on Krishna. It can sort out priorities, because many situations of obfuscation and slowness in being able to take up devotional service has to do with deprioritizing Krishna. So once something becomes an ultimatum where I have 6 months to go on the planet, or 3 months to go on the planet, even the materialists who have not been exposed to spiritual phenomena, even they want to experience things, which are out of normal. They don't continue with their sessions. They don't keep doing what they've been doing in the previous week and the months and the years. They change. What to say of spiritualists and serious spiritualists? Everybody changes. So it's an opportunity for people to be able to set things aside and for them to be able to move forward. And that opportunity should not be one of frustration. It should not be one of where we begin blaming the Lord. We don't want to be blaming Krishna. We don't want to be blaming Guru. You see, people do not understand a very simple fact. Devotees, I'm making this statement, is that the only connection one has to the Guru is to the medium of faith. And when the medium of faith is lost, then they lose the ability to follow instructions. And as a consequence, everything else falls apart because it's on very unsteady ground. Okay? So what needs to happen here is for us to be able to accept what has been given. We need to be able to accept the circumstances of life as they are. We need to do our very best in being able to plan. We need to do our very best. For instance, if someone is sick, do all you need to do for you to get treated, but with a mood of complete dependence on Krishna. If someone has great financial difficulty, do all you need to do, but depend on Krishna, because that is a circumstance which is required, and it is an unusual experience. It's an unusual experience because one will realize what it is to be dependent. One will realize what it is to kind of experience the connection with Krishna in a deeper sense. One will realize what their challenges are. In other words, when circumstances in material life become quite intense, how much are we being able to chant? How much are you able to follow your daily schedule if our lives are being disrupted? How much are we able to pick up the beads and concentrate and call upon the holy names without being bothered by the so-called material calamity or situation which has come about? There's so much information which can be gained in a short period of time if one goes through an intense experience, that it is invaluable in many cases for us to be able to move forward, because those experiences can then be inventoried. Then we can start working on them for us to be able to move forward, and there can be some real serious progress that can be made in those directions. Okay, something that is very important for us to be able to look forward to. Okay, so that's the point which we want to make, is that complete dependence on Krishna is experienced by the devotees in Vraja. There is a quality of devotees in Vraja, complete dependence. Okay, and Krishna is their only protection. Now the devotee, the cowherd boys, when they saw Aghasura, the demon who came in the form of the huge python, the snake, the serpent, and he opens up the mouth, and all the cowherd boys simply trot in and walk into the mouth of this Aghasura in confidence that Krishna is there. It is Krishna, for a moment, who gets a little worried that they are all walking into danger. Okay, and by the arrangement of Yoga Maya, Krishna experiences anxiety. He experiences anxiety that, oh, they're all going in, and he is experiencing that specific mellow of wanting to protect those who are dependent on him as well. They're all going in, and he's afraid now that, oh, something could happen to them. It's a special mellow because there's also an expression of love. So he experiences, now this is dependence, and this dependence is something which is seen in Braja because they relish it. It's almost as if there are many, many cases where this particular situation of dependence on Krishna is relishable. Why? Because he comes forth. He comes forth in such interesting ways to lift us up. He comes forth and gives us experiences. All of this basically enhances faith. As a consequence, there are experiences, and experiences, the more experiences are more profound, greater is the level of faith as time goes on. So the chanting becomes more serious, and so on and so forth. So sometimes these experiences are very required for us to kind of kickstart or give a jolt to our own lives so that we can move forward. Okay. Now let's read the other ones. To always feel meek and humble. To always feel meek and humble is a situation of surrender, which is the actual definition of humility, where one is able to accept the circumstances of life as Krishna's arrangement, and they have the courage to act upon it. This is the actual definition of humility, where one is able to accept the circumstances of life, they have the courage to act upon it, and they don't become frustrated. They become more and more strengthened in their resolve to serve, and they keep accepting the arrangements. And the more they accept their arrangements and more they become grateful, the more they're able to progress in devotional service. To throw oneself at Lord Krishna's lotus feet. This is the last limb of surrender. To throw oneself at the Lord's lotus feet. Do we really feel that way? We should question ourselves when we go to the temple. Do we really feel that way? When we look at the deity, do we have this feeling of wanting to just go and throw ourselves at his feet, begging for mercy? Do we have that feeling of wanting to clasp his lotus feet and hold on to it? Examine ourselves, because it's a limb of surrender. If it is done genuinely, then all of this constitutes the process of Atma Nivedanam. All of this constitutes the process of complete surrender. Now, why is this important? Because all of these, which is the actual path of surrender, because 1866, Krishna says, Sarvadharman Paritejya, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, Aham Tum Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayasmi Ma Suchaha. He is giving us conditions. He is telling us, for you to be able to make a statement or to engage in Manmanabha Madbhakto, 18.66 is going to be required. Sarvadharman Paritejya, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. What does it mean? It means that you should have given up all other forms of identities. Everything should be funneled through the identity of being Krishna conscious. Every other identity of being a professional, being a relative, being the parent or the son and the husband, wife, all these identities are now being channeled to the central identity of being Krishna Das, of being a servant of Krishna. Sarvadharman Paritejya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. He is not asking us to stop. He is not asking us to move away from performing action. He is asking us to dovetail and to channel everything through the identity of being Krishna's servant. This identity crisis is the issue for the last offense. When identities of this particular world overwhelm the devotee to such an extent that they take on the identity of being a certain personality associated with this body more seriously than being Krishna's servant. Okay? Sometimes it comes out of false pride. They achieve so much, and as a consequence, because of their achievements, they become so proud that we are very intelligent, we're very capable, and as a consequence, they don't feel like surrendering and clasping the lotus feet of Krishna. In some cases, it is simply weakness, where there is such great attachment to a certain object or a certain person in their lives that they are unable to take that attachment and offer it to Krishna. Expert acharyas have the ability to dovetail this particular surrender process and be able to allow the devotee to move forward. They have the ability to dovetail them, how to help them be able to take this out and put forth, their best in terms of their surrender, the process of surrender. Okay, experts do have it because it's the identity crisis which is preventing us from committing to the last offense. It is constantly our focus on other identities in this world, where the other identities and the activities associated with them supersede our ability to be Krishna's servant. We are not being able to efficiently channel our identity in the process of being able to offer Krishna service. Excuse me. We are not able to do that. So that is a challenge that we are experiencing. Now, there's a beautiful story in the Sri Sampradaya, which I would like to relate on how an expert spiritual master is able to spot tendencies and he's able to use them. And not everybody can spot this. It has to be an expert. Once Sri Ramanujacharya, as he was walking in a southern city next to the river, he suddenly saw a vision. He saw a vision of this particular person, which is quite unusual. We're talking about 10th century South India. South India, in certain parts of South India, things are still very conservative. What to say of the 10th century, where Vedic culture was very prominent. In the 10th century, there was this couple who were walking on the riverbank. It was, I think, a hot summer day. And this person, he was extraordinarily attached to his wife to such an extent that he was constantly engaging in making sure that the sun was not disturbing her. He was examining her face and constantly wanting to ensure that she was not being exposed to sunlight, where her skin, which was not going to get burnt, was not going to get sunburned, and so on and so forth. He was so attached that everybody around were able to see that he was engaging in some very affectionate exchanges with his spouse in the middle of the road during the day. And noticing this, Srila Ramanujacharya was quite surprised. Why was he surprised? Because this is happening in the middle of the day in 10th century South India. It's very unusual for someone to be so brave that they could show that level of affection to their spouse, or anyone in open. It's very unusual. So one must be completely immersed and have the capacity for complete absorption for them to be able to display such affection. So he summoned this devotee. He summoned this person. And he said, come on over, I want to talk to you. So the disciples went and then told him, the Acharya wants to speak. So can you spare a moment? Can you come with us? And he followed the disciples, and then Ramanujacharya asked him. He said, what is it that you notice in your wife, which is so attractive that you're unable to take away your glances? What is it which is making you behave in this fashion and then, receive so much ridicule, where the whole world is ridiculing you? You're walking on the street, it's in the middle of the day, the heat is on, and you are just behaving in this manner where people are ridiculing you, and yet you don't notice that, and you're completely unmindful of all the ridicule. What is it which is allowing you to do that? What part of your what is it which is basically attracting you? So immediately he didn't hesitate. He said, she has the most beautiful eyes. His answer was that she has the most beautiful eyes, and I'm very attracted to her eyes, and as a consequence, I'm unable to take my eyes off her face. I constantly examine her beauty, and I really don't care about whether the world ridicules me. So Srila Ramanujacharya was very impressed by this absorption and this honesty, because this person was honest. He was not hiding. Others might have the same attraction, but they might not act in that manner, due to fear of public ridicule. But this person, he was absolutely fearless. So he said, Ramanujacharya said, okay, what if I show you eyes? What if I bring you in touch with beauty, which was far, far greater? Would you be interested in seeing that? The person was absolutely eager because he was quite genuine. He and his wife both accompanied Sri Ramanujacharya to the Srirangam temple, where the Lord is reclining on Sesha. And it's one of the most beautiful deity forms. Very potent worship goes on. Even now, when you go there, they maintain very high standards. It's very nice. So he took both the husband and wife to the sanctum, and then he brought them in. Because Srila Ramanujacharya was who he was an extraordinarily potent Acharya. He, by his mystic potency, by his mercy, he provided very special vision to both the husband and wife. The Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena, the special vision of bhakti was provided by the Acharya to the most fortunate husband and wife, and they were able to see the deity in his original form with these material eyes. Sri Ramanujacharya produced that effect because he was there, he gave Kripa, and they were able to have an immediate experience of the highest order of being able to see Krishna, or rather Vishnu, Mahavishnu, face to face. They have the vision, they had vision of Krishna. And that vision was so profound and so beautiful that Krishna's beauty was so exalted and so amazing that both the husband and wife became extraordinary devotees. So the point which you're trying to make here is that they're well known. They became very good devotees, and their extent of surrender and their detachment from the material world was so profound that Ramanujacharya, in fact, took them into a lot of confidential, in the sense they were confidential servants of Ramanujacharya. So now, why do we mention this? We mention this because attachment in itself is not so much of a problem. Attachment in itself can be diverted, and one can understand Krishna through such mediums. In other words, our propensity to get attached is not a problem. It is the object. Okay? We need to understand our relationship. We need to understand everything else in relationship to Krishna being in the center. Okay? That is the cure for this particular offense of us constantly being able to monitor what we do and what we do not do in relationship to Krishna, constantly keep him in the center. We literally follow the precepts of Manmanabha Madbhakta, where we're thinking of him. We are thinking and saying, okay, should I do this? Will he be pleased? Should I not do this? Okay, this particular inventory taking, or a kind of being accountable internally, is what this particular offense is all about. That is the cure. Because the more and more we start doing that, the more and more we will start experiencing coming closer to Krishna through the holy names. Because this particular attachment to who am I, my identity with this material world, and then what is mine, what is not mine, so on, is dangerous. The reason why it's dangerous is because there is a complete opposite. And how do you recognize if you're too attached? If you're frustrated, we should recognize you're too attached. Just remember that. Remember that the benchmark for existence in this world is that if you're frustrated with circumstances, then you have to accept the fact that we are more in touch with material nature than we are with our inner self or with our bhakti. So let's remember that. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and I want to see if there are any further questions, any questions that I can take. So far, there aren't any. I'm going to give 30 seconds, and I'll just wait for questions, and after which, if there aren't any, we'll end the session. Okay, there aren't any questions, so I will stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.